Shalom. Welcome again to this week's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. We're very, very delighted that you joined us. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. As you know, these podcasts are designed to explore issues related to the revolution in longevity that is impacting our families and our communities. We invite you to check out the website, jewishsacredaging.com, its Facebook page. And we do thank those of you who've decided to click on that donate button on the website and support our work here. We are very, very grateful. And those of you who like to do that, just go to jewishsacredaging.com there. Just click on the conveniently located donate button and follow the prompts. It's real easy. We are very, very pleased to welcome to today's Seekers of Meaning, Carol Steinberg, a journalist and activist in the Alzheimer's Association and Alzheimer's community, to talk about a very, very, very interesting book entitled Come Grandpa Meow, Let's Fly. That's the title of the book. Carol, welcome. It's very, very nice to see you. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
This is a very, very interesting book. It looks like if you're walking by Barnes & Noble or your local bookstore, it would say, oh, that's an interesting book. It looks like a children's book because it's like a children's book, whatever, the way it's laid out. But it really, really isn't. And that's what I really want to explore. But first, we got to ask the obvious question. The title of your book is Come Grandpa Meow, Let's Fly. New? What's with that title?
It is a little interesting, right?
Oh, it's very interesting.
So my father's name was Michael, and my children and his other granddaughters called him Grandpa Michael. But my father had a habit prior to his onset of Alzheimer's disease to making cat sounds. He would always tease his granddaughters, his nieces and nephews. He would be hiding. He'd come around the corner. Instead of saying hello, he'd say meow. So it was just a way of paying tribute to my dad in a fun way.
So the Let's Fly thing, where did that come from?
So Let's Fly is a song that my dad used to sing to me and my siblings and then to his granddaughters. And I sing it now to my grandchildren, and they know it by heart now. It's when they're on a swing and they're pumping their legs. Let's Fly is a version of a song that I sing to them, but it's very similar. And it's really a way of saying, let's have fun. Let's go up in the air, etc.
We've all done that with our kids and grandchildren. When you push them on the swings and they go high.
Thankfully, they know how to pump themselves now.
Yeah, well, yeah. They either scream higher, or let me off of this. It's like whatever. This is not a children's book, is it?
In some ways, it is definitely a children's book, but in other ways, it's not. Because it's an easy way to explain Alzheimer's disease or a related disease in very user-friendly language that takes out fear and confusion. And what's unique about this book, which is why it's intergenerational, as you picked up on, is there's a part 2 that's a collection of intergenerational activities. And the intent there is to foster bonds in new ways with the person with the disease. So these intergenerational activities, I could use it if I knew someone who had Alzheimer's disease. It doesn't have to be with a child, but they're very conducive to intergenerational.
Did you test this with your own kids? It just occurred to me. Did you do that?
So I did not. I have 4 grandchildren ranging in age from almost 5 to 10. And I did not test it with them because thankfully there's no Alzheimer's that's immediate. I don't have it, thankfully. There's no other grandparents that have it. And I didn't want to plant the seed in their heads. What's wrong? Is this going to happen to you? It's already enough that they know I'm quote unquote old. So I didn't want to plant another seed.
No, I understand. Well, you're talking, just wait a minute, because it's very intimate. It's a very personal story.
And it's my family's story.
Yeah, that's quite clear. You write this also in a way, when I looked at it and read it, also through a child's eyes. So we were talking before we started the recording. there's a scene in there, I said it's like in the movie, when you sell the movie rights to the book, where the little granddaughter, they, as you said, used to grandpa, they were talking and makes the meow sounds and is laughing, but all of a sudden knows her name, and all of a sudden something happens. The grandpa doesn't know the name, and the little girl says, what's wrong with grandpa? Walk me through that. Obviously that's a reflection of something that's in your family and it's happened. That's a key scene in the whole, it's kind of like moves the story and brings things right into your face. This is what we're talking about.
I think a lot of times children, and I think even with my own daughters when they were young, when my dad had Alzheimer's disease, they don't really recognize necessarily that something's wrong with the person, that the person has the disease. My father always used to joke, for example. He continued to joke, and that was a way, I believe, to mask his symptoms. But if someone directly, like in the book, calls you by a different name or says to you, who are you? It's so in the child's face. What is wrong with my grandpa? And that's when Linny goes running to her mother, and the mother cuddles her in her lap. And that's really how I see a parent reading this book to their child, or a grandparent reading it to their child. And the mom needs to explain what the disease is in very simple language, but also give that message. In his heart, Grandpa still knows who you are. He might not know your name is Linny. He might not even know you're his granddaughter, but somewhere inside he knows he loves you. And I think that's how it gets a lot of people through this disease, whether it's a spouse or an adult child or a grandchild. There's still a connection somewhere. And the person with the disease still feels that connection, even if they don't know who the person is.
When did you decide to write this?
So I wrote this book almost 30 years ago, the first draft.
Oh.
It was the week my dad died, and we had just gotten up from sitting Shiva. My mother had come up from Florida and was with us, obviously, for the funeral, and then she stayed with me. And it just poured out of me. I've always been a writer. I was a journalist for a long time. It was a very rough draft, and it was before I really knew anything about Alzheimer's. I'll be the first to admit, when my dad had the disease, I think we did a lot of things wrong. I didn't really know anything. But a few years later, I became an executive at an Alzheimer's nonprofit, and I was there for about 15 years, and I learned so much. So I would take the story out from time to time and adjust things and tweak things. And it's really an accurate portrayal from all my years of education about Alzheimer's, of talking to people with the disease or their care partners. And then I just felt this book, before I died, needed to see the light of day as a tribute to my parents, as a legacy for my family, but most of all, really to help people with the disease, because everyone is struggling.
Have you ever been asked to do a reading with a group?
So I haven't yet, because I haven't marketed it in that way yet.
Okay.
I have read some excerpts from it on some podcasts.
It just seemed to me that it would be very helpful for an Alzheimer's Association meeting or a group that's dealing with caregiving support group, caregivers, because you are a caregiver, so you walk that walk. I think that's important to make people understand. It's not just a book that came out of your brain. It's a book that came out of your neshama, your soul, because you lived it.
I lived it as a long-distance caregiver. All the credit goes to my mom. They were in Florida. We were in New York. So we helped where we could. We visited as often as we could, given our busy lives. But really, all the credit goes to my mom. Dedicated, committed care partner.
So many people are walking this walk right now, given the explosion of dementia and Alzheimer's. And significant numbers of those people are doing exactly what you had to do. They're not living in the same neighborhood. They're not living in the same apartment house on the east side of Manhattan. They're 1,000 miles away or whatever, and they may see each other 6-7 times a year. What was that like when you got off the plane and you hadn't seen Dad in a couple of months, and there was that first realization of, wow, things have really changed?
Well, we knew things were changing because they would come up very often to stay with us, and they particularly would stay with me. So I had been seeing changes. But when I would go down there was some times where it really hit you in the face when his balance was off and now he was in a wheelchair. When one of the last times was when he had shingles and walked into the apartment and he was covered and he had no recognition. He had to be in tremendous pain and he had no recognition that he was in pain. I think the biggest thing was, again, going back to my mom and seeing what a tremendous job she was doing and how much care and how much she had to help with his activities of daily living.
Yeah, I think there's a scene in the book where you walk in and you haven't seen them, and I think it's the little girl sees Grandpa in the wheelchair and turns and says, what's going on? Or why doesn't he know who I am? Like I said, this is really in many ways through the child's eyes, and that sense of loss that an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old may not be able to comprehend.
But I think for adults, as you said so astutely about it being an intergenerational book, there's so much education needed about Alzheimer's disease. And most people, when they think of it, they do think only memory loss. They don't realize that as the disease progresses, the body is breaking down. The brain isn't talking to the rest of the organs. And that's why things happen, like my father being in a wheelchair or incontinence or hearing loss, things like that.
You have a section, I think you say, okay, now these are some of the tasks that the adults can do when you're faced with a situation. You have reminiscing, music, cooking, gardening, nature. Those are the 4 things, if I remember correctly. I know there's a whole vocabulary that needs to be learned when dealing with somebody in a situation like that. It's really going where a person is.
Correct. Meeting them in the moment.
Meeting them in the moment. I've also, because we've done some podcasts with some people, and we've been told that the part of the brain that processes music is one of the last, if not the last. So music is and I know colleagues, cancers who will visit memory care units will play like a Shabbos melody, and that melody will trigger something. Talk to me about these 4. How did you evolve them? Was this from your own experience or from your work with the Alzheimer's groups? These 4 pillars: reminiscing, music, cooking, nature/gardening.
Those are just examples. There are lots of other activities. And the first page of the intergenerational section does talk about, in general, sort of rules of thumb to apply this to other things. But all the research shows how important the creative arts are. And you're right, music does last. My father used to whistle and carry a tune until near the end. And also because religion, spirituality is so important to so many people, those songs from religion tend to embed in their memories as well, so last longer. But the reason I picked those 4 specifically is they tie into things that happen in the book. I wanted everything to tie together. So gardening, for example, gardening is something Linny, the character in the book, did with Grandpa Meow. Music, the song, Come Linny, Let's Fly. Music. Reminiscence is something so important to do with people with Alzheimer's disease. And cooking is another thing. It's just so easy to do with people. And there's ways to adjust all of these activities to meet the person in the moment. And that's what's key, to meet them in the moment.
So I know people will. I know some synagogues, they'll bake challah, and the touching, the tactile, the touching of the challah, the taste of the lighting of the candle, they'll trigger memories. But somebody may be saying, well, wait a minute, my mom's dealing with Alzheimer's. Do you mean that I'm supposed to cook, make latkes or the brisket, and she's going to help me because she may not even remember? Talk to me about the cooking thing.
Well, it's not that much that she'll remember making the brisket or making the latkes. It's more an activity that offers that social connection, because there is so much isolation on the part of the care partner and the person with the disease. So this is something to bring them together. So with cooking, obviously the person with the disease isn't going to be standing over a pot frying the latkes, but they certainly could help in some ways. Again, you're not going to give them a knife, but they certainly could stir. They could pour in the matzah meal. There's things that they could do. And touch is so important. And it's another way, while you're cooking, you might want to bring up about the holidays, about making the latkes at a certain point. And maybe that will trigger some memories. You mentioned about going into a facility and then making challah. A lot of day programs for people with the disease have stations set up, workstations. There'll be a manual typewriter, like sort of one behind me, and there'll be a sewing machine because it's bringing people back to their past, and it can trigger memories. The long-term memories are what lasts the longest. The short-term are what go the fastest.
You used a word that is increasingly being studied and analyzed for a whole variety of reasons. And I'd like to ask you about it since you walk this walk, and that's this concept of isolation. You did this. And when we do caregiving workshops and stuff for Jewish sacred aging, this comes up a lot about the caregiving and the community. But eventually people just say, but with all the support, you really do this alone in many ways.
You're doing it alone because nobody could understand until they're walking directly in those shoes. I can never say that I understand what my mom went through. I can't.
Yeah.
I wasn't the primary caregiver. I have no idea what she went through. I have no idea what she was feeling. All I know is that she had that commitment and she had that love. She was honoring her marriage vows and taking care of my dad.
Did your dad stay with you? Did your dad stay in that apartment in Florida until he died, or did he get transferred into a memory care unit?
He was at home until the very end when he got bed sores and had to be hospitalized, and then went directly into hospice, and he passed soon after. My mom did have a paid caregiver near the end who was absolutely wonderful. But I do want to get back, Rabbi, if I could, to isolation. There's so many studies that show that for the care partner and for us, like you and me, that isolation, lack of socialization is one of the modifiable risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. And in addition, so many people find that when they're caring for someone with the disease, that friends step away. They don't know what to say. Family steps away. There's the fear factor. There's still that idea that they're going to catch Alzheimer's. I mean, it's absurd to me to think it with all the research out there and all the awareness raising that someone could think that, but it's true. And there's also such a stigma still attached to this disease. And it's really sad because for the person with Alzheimer's or a related disease, there's research that shows that 88% of them feel discriminated against. It's sad.
I was just at a conference last month that talked about flourishing and dealt with aspects of isolation. And I was speaking to a group at a synagogue here outside of Philly that wanted to talk about how the concept of loneliness and isolation and how it cuts off people. Sometimes just being present, the power of presence, holding somebody's hand. You may not have to say anything. Just the fact that you're making eye contact, that you're there. And you're right, it is very, very scary. I think that's one of the things that people really don't talk enough about, but it's very frightening to talk about. There for the grace, do I go in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years? And these are very deep psychological and spiritual questions that now are on the front, because I don't know many families who have not dealt with some aspect of some type of memory loss, because they keep telling us the longer you live, it's the original equipment. Sometimes it just wears out in certain ways. In dealing with dad, did that ever cross your mind of, is this inherited? Is this going to be me? And what do I do?
So it didn't cross my mind when my dad had the disease. And I think that was either because lack of knowledge or burying my head in the sand. It obviously crosses my mind all the time now because I am in the Alzheimer's world. I write a newsletter for an organization called Voices of Alzheimer's, and I've been doing this on and off now for about 25 years. So Alzheimer's is constantly in my head. I am older. It scares me to no end. But from a genetic standpoint, I haven't had genetic testing, nor do I plan to, because my parents had us when they were much older. They got married late in life. So my dad got Alzheimer's disease or diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease when he was in his 70s. Most times when Alzheimer's is related to genes, it happens early on, under 65. That's the majority. So I'm not really concerned from a genetic standpoint. Where I am concerned is that I know very well the 14 modifiable risk factors for Alzheimer's disease, know it much too well. And I don't practice all of them. And I should.
Well, this is a limited media, the podcast. But if you were sitting or having these people, a group of people in front of you who were going to be listening to you because what if, or they may be beginning to deal with this in their own family, what kind of advice would you give them?
So a few things. One is early diagnosis is so important. And we've always been saying that, but now it's especially important because there are new drugs on the market that attack amyloid in the brain. Amyloid is the major characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. And that drug is only available to people when they're diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment or in the very early stages of Alzheimer's disease. So if you get diagnosed in the advanced stages, there's no effective treatments out there right now. But these drugs that have come to market in the past 2 years or so have been shown to delay some of the progression of symptoms. They've also shown in some people to clear the plaque. I was talking to someone yesterday who told me he's been on lecanemab for 18 months. That's one of the new drugs. And his latest brain imaging showed that 2/3 of the plaque has been cleared. That's amazing. That never happened years ago. Whether it will last long term, it's still too early to tell. So early diagnosis is key. It is absolutely not a cure, but it can give you quality of life for a longer period of time, which is important. The other thing that's really important is the reason not to sit on this is there is what's called a neurological desert out there. There's a real shortage of neurologists. So we hear about wait times of a year, 2 years to see a neurologist, particularly in rural areas, in low-income areas. That's another reason to get a jump on this. The other thing I would advise people is for the care partner. And I know you've talked about this on your podcast before when you've had care partners on or families that have been affected, is to get support. My mom was really private. We'd mentioned to her, go to a support group. It didn't sit well with her. She never did. So I think she kept a lot in to her harm. But support is important. Taking care of yourself. That's the first piece of advice to care partners all the time. You need respite. You need to socialize. You need to talk to people.
Right.
While taking care of your loved one.
Every time I work with a family who begins what I call the tunnel, the caregiving, where the world changes, I said, you're going to be overwhelmed, but please do yourself a favor. Rest, eat properly, get out as much as you can, because there's going to be a tendency to just isolate and withdraw. And that's going to exacerbate the problem because if you get sick, you can't take care of your loved one.
It's the old cliche about the oxygen mask.
Yeah, but it's true because as you know, the instances of caregiver burnout, et cetera, are legion.
Absolutely.
Before we run out of time, I got to ask you this question because it's just fascinating. There's the mythology, that as this disease continues to go and to develop, a person does not understand me. They don't hear me. They don't recognize me. So that's the fear fat people withdraw. I have a sense from my own experience and this may be just purely my own desire to believe this, but you walked this walk and wrote the book. I have a funny feeling that an individual dealing with really towards the end in Alzheimer's, they go to a level of reality that we cannot understand. That there's something there in a world that we cannot approach. So I just ask you to respond to that.
I have no answers. I would say yes, they're probably in their own world because they're not understanding what's going on around them. They're not processing what's going on. But I have no way of knowing. What happened with my dad near the end, I think is what happens with a lot of people. My dad was in hospice. We were up in New York. I think he was holding on until we came down as children to see him. But you hear that all the time.
And I believe I've seen that all the time.
Right. So in some ways, Alzheimer's didn't impact his death, I guess, because I know he felt that we were there at the end.
Yeah. See, this is all part of and people are beginning, I think, to study this. I just call it a mystery. There are mysteries that surround this disease and the interact, because as you know, everybody does it differently. There's no template. There's many trends, but every personality is there. Some people, that's why, as you know, some people act out. They're a little bit more violent. Some people are very passive. But I think one of the areas that scientists are going to be studying now is this whole, what happens now at the end? Where do people go? What is functioning, not functioning? But I think the message, again, that I took out of your book, and I think that you've reflected on, is just being present, relational. Get that the isolation is damaging to everybody.
Absolutely. And that's why I keep going back to meet in the moment. I say that in the book.
Yeah.
I say it whenever I talk about it because it's so important to meet in the moment.
And not be afraid of the moment. Not be afraid of the moment. Carol, the book, Come Grandpa Meow, Let's Fly. If somebody wants to get a hold of this, where do they go to get it?
It is available on Amazon.
The great, wonderful, everything's available on Amazon. Is it in bookstores?
It is not yet in bookstores right now. It's only on Amazon.
Okay, so go to Amazon, click on that. Come Grandpa Meow, Let's Fly. Carol, thank you very, very much for sharing your story. Good luck with the book. It's a very, very wonderful book, and congratulations. And I know just reading it, it comes right from your neshama.
It does. It does. Thank you.
And it will help people. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To all of you, thank you very much for joining us on today's edition of Secrets of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. We thank you for your time. We're very grateful that you share some of your time with us. Secrets of Meaning is recorded at the studios of Lubetkin Media in beautiful Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a big shout out to our genius producer, Steve Lubetkin. Until we meet each other again on the next Secrets of Meaning, please take care of yourself. Most of all, be kind to one another. Shalom, Todah.